You're listening to episode 220 of Positively Trek. My name is Barry DeFord, and I'm happy to be joining you all on this wonderful episode I've actually been looking forward to for a very long time. And with me, as always, is Mr. Dan Gunther. How you doing, Dan?
Very, very well. I've been really looking forward to this, too, ever since you first proposed it. So I think we're in for a special one this week.
Yeah, so you, if you follow, if you know who I am on Twitter, I guess, I am kind of quiet about that, but if we've crossed paths on some social medias, Facebook and whatnot, you may notice I follow a wonderful person named Bryson, who is Mi'kmaq. He's a ship's navigator. He's an educator. He's active in his community, and I'm really honored to call him my friend. And we're having him back on. If you've listened to Politrex before, he was actually on the last episode I ever recorded with that. More to say there later in the news segments. But we welcome to the show Mr. Bryson. How you doing today, Bryson?
I am doing very well. I'm excited to do this. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. So last time we met, we were talking about Indigenous representation in Star Trek, and how do you feel about that? Just really quick off the top, like, have you noticed any change since we spoke, or
none at all?
Yeah, like they've gone in good other directions, but yeah.
I kind of like sometimes I'll do like the shade to like Star Trek and be like, it's been 4,000 or 40,000 some odd days since no representation for Indigenous people on Trek. And I just do stuff like that. Maybe somebody will see it.
We can hope. I mean, I think that is one thing about Star Trek, is if they're going to be putting all their chips down on progressiveness and diversity, they've done good jobs in other places, and I commend them on that. But this is the next step, and addressing the colonial aspects as well of the Federation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So. Yeah, well, it's wonderful to have you back. I would say what's new, but I think that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So perhaps we could move directly into the news there, Dan, unless there's anything else you wanted to weigh in on there.
No, absolutely. I think there's lots of good fodder for some great discussion later, because I'm excited to pick your brain, Bryson, about some stuff, and I'm really excited to learn a lot more. So this is going to be a lot of fun. But let's talk about the week's Star Trek news, which, there isn't much, but there's a couple little news stories I highlighted here.
The first one is Star Trek Prodigy is nominated for Best Animated Children's Series, and that's in the Emmys. So Prodigy is potentially now a greater than zero chance of winning an Emmy, which I think it's well-deserved. This has been a fun show. I've enjoyed the episodes I've watched so far. It's whimsical. It's a good little piece of work there. Yeah,
last time we spoke, you were talking about kind of catching up on them and stuff. I'm curious where you're at in that watch.
The very first episode, okay. I got about 35 minutes through, and then we ended up getting a new cat. So that's taken precedent over keeping up with Prodigy at this point, but
that's
there is still time.
Yeah.
Bryson, have you watched any Prodigy?
Yes, right up until the last episode on Thursday. Yeah.
All right, so this is maybe a conversation between you and Dan, maybe a little more than. What do you guys think? How do you feel about this nomination?
It's well deserved, I think, because it's just such a great show. It feels fresh.
Mm-hmm. So fresh is in it's kind of it's got stories that we may not have necessarily, kind of looked at, or is it kind of more in its characterization?
Yeah, in its characterization, it has a different take. It is geared towards a younger crowd, but it doesn't shy away from heavy topics as well. So it kind of brings them to a level that younger people can understand.
Yeah, and I think it does a really good job of carrying on that Star Trek tradition of good messages. I kind of credit watching TNG as a kid for some of, at least a good chunk of my morality and how I view the world and that sort of thing. And this show, I feel like it distills those down a little bit for a younger audience, but with still that same message, with that same heart to it. Bryson, this most recent episode you mentioned, Let Sleeping Borg Lie.
Yeah.
And that one I felt had just a really strong message at the end about, family and inclusiveness and belonging to a collective, I guess, in a roundabout way. I really like that.
Yeah, and it also like dealt with PTSD and stuff like that. So like, it was a great episode, I think. Like it was very nostalgic because, like it's the Borg. Everybody loves them and hates them at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. But so I agree. Very well deserved nomination here. When I first saw this news story pop up, I was like, oh, a Star Trek Emmy nomination. So it'll be some technical thing, or, best children's animated series or whatever, right? Best animated children's series. That's great. I would love to see them win for like a creative award like that,
and especially a show in their first season.
No kidding.
Yeah,
it's something that I do feel a mild amount of embarrassment for not having kept up, but the way the two of you have both spoken about this, obviously I am going to see if I can get some more familial watching with this, because I do think that it's a pretty accessible too. Would you guys say?
Yeah.
Very much so, yeah.
That's awesome.
The last few episodes I've actually, when I watch them a second time, I've kind of tried to put myself in the mind of someone who's maybe a little younger, but also has never really watched Star Trek before. And so, for example, this most recent episode, being introduced to the Borg for the first time, I feel like the episode does a really great job of taking a lot of those Star Trek elements and saying, okay, this is what this is. Here's kind of the quick 10-minute lesson, and let's get into the story now. And I love it.
Yeah, and also they don't like dwell on the deep cuts. Like, you need to know this exact little moment from this episode of whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So like it kind of just has that that deep cut, but it doesn't dwell on it.
Yeah, it's definitely there for the longtime fans. Like, there's enough stuff there for the seasoned fans among us, let's say, to pick up on and really appreciate, but it remains very accessible to the new viewer for sure. So the Children's and Family Emmy Awards, they'll be presented on Saturday, December 10th. We'll look forward to that and report here, I guess, if Prodigy can rack up a win for its first season.
It sounds pretty deserved.
I think so, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, the other story, I think, is it's a trip into the uncanny valley, and I'll tell you about it in a second. And it's also something that, now I'm looking at it, there is a very, very high possibility that if my local comic book store brings a few in, I would potentially or even order one, because they're actually kind of cool. These Star Trek Super7 Star Trek to the Next Generation Ultimate action figures with some real deep, speaking of deep cuts, like you can like Riker, for instance, I was looking at his specifically, and you can change the type of hands he has. It comes with a trombone, it comes with a very bizarre tiny Picard plushie, and you can, and the best part that I like about it is, depending on what he's doing, you can change his face, and there's actually a few different facial features you can get for the different characters. My favorite also is Data's, that doesn't change at all, just there's some things coming out of one of his, and I think the other one he's wearing his visor or something like that, is his poker visor. They're very like articulate, and they're quite detailed. So yeah, you can change their face. They all come with like very little crazy like specific trinkets that come with them, and like companions, like Data comes with Spot. It's all very, it's strange, but I like it.
Yeah, these are definitely something that caught my eye. Super7 put out another line of TNG figures that were like kind of, I didn't really get into them or look into them, but they were a lot less detailed and a little bit more kind of, not quite this accurate, I guess. So when I saw these come up, I was kind of thinking like, kind of more of the same. And then I clicked into them, and I'm pretty impressed with some of these things. And this first wave, I guess, this first offering, we have Riker, like you said, and Data, and also Guinan and Locutus, which is pretty cool. I think for myself, if I were going to pick any of these up, and I'm kind of maybe going to do that. I think I would want to get Guinan and Locutus, because I know me, and if I get Riker and Data, I would have to get the rest of the crew as they come out, and I don't know if I want to make that commitment. So, but yeah, these are pretty impressive. Guinan, you can even do like her crazy cat hands when she's confronting Q. Like, I love this.
Yeah.
Does the Riker one come with a little chair? So you can do the... And what about Angel 1 chest hair?
Oh, that needs to be like a variant figure that they put out.
Right.
I love it.
Oh. He does have one where it's like this like wry smile he's got on his face. So yeah, if you had the one where he's like wearing that like skimpy little toga, that iridescent toga house coat that he's got with his chest hair and that wry smile, my goodness.
I'm good at sewing, so.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I can modify.
That's awesome. They would have to put out a beardless one though, too, I think, for that one, which I don't know. Riker without a beard just is wrong somehow.
Yeah. He's got a thin face without the beard. I like the beard better. It gives him that commanding look. I don't know, $55 American. I could justify one after some saving for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
They're kind of a nice medium between, like the Playmates ones that are coming out, which are nice for their price. They're kind of in the $17 US range, somewhere in there. And then you've got like the $200 Exo 6 figures that, that's a lot of money. $55 is still quite a bit too, though.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the question then. Would the two of you take the action figures out of the packaging and actually manipulate them, put them up and stuff? Myself, I would 100% do that and then stand it up kind of near where my desk is or something like that. I would definitely take it out. What about you two?
Yeah, I'd definitely take it out.
Yeah, I would with these ones as well, too. I think they just have so much playability with the different heads and stuff,
It's so weird. I wonder what hand. You can almost see what hand he has in poker too. I should have had a better look.
Oh, it looks like a straight flush.
A straight flush. Of course, it's a straight flush.
Oh, actually.
Oh, and Data's got a hand in poker too.
Actually, would it be a royal flush? Actually,
why not? Oh goodness.
This episode of Positively Trek would not be possible without the support of those of you who have gone to patreon.com/positivelytrek and signed up to become a Patreon supporter of the show. Thank you all so very much for your donations. They truly do help bring this show to you each week. Thank you especially to our Constitution class supporters, Joyce Marin, Justin Ozer, Jim Stoffel, Jesse Earl, Dave Garcia, Rick Young, and Paul D. Kinnear. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show, go to patreon.com/positivelytrek. You can get perks such as early access to episodes, ad-free versions of episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, and much more. Once again, that's patreon.com/positivelytrek. Thank you all once again. And now, let's get back to the show.
I do have to say that getting to sort of experience Star Trek's many different facets has always been something I've enjoyed, and collecting is one thing, making, going to conventions we've talked about as well. But Bryson's done something I think is not only authentic, but also kind of organic. And it sort of has really given me a real feeling of Gene Roddenberry's vision, as would be said, of it's Star Trek is kind of being in the military or being out exploring or being, kind of in some kind of organized Starfleet-y kind of thing. But obviously it doesn't really exist. And I have a bit of apprehension around, the kind of the military aspect of Starfleet. The exploration aspect, however, is something really cool in the learning part. And so I find, Bryson, you've done this really cool job of uniting things that I've always loved. And that is Star Trek, that is exploration, Indigenous culture, and Mr. Rogers. And I want to ask you, what initially compelled you to start sharing your experience, and what exactly are you taking again? I'm always forgetting the name of the course you're taking, and what's sort of the end game you have in mind?
I'm taking marine navigation technology. Basically, just all the courses like that Transport Canada offers to eventually get your tickets, like your marine tickets, all in one program, instead of doing like most people used to do self-studying, right? And do one course at a time. So like, yeah, this is just a more structured aspect of it. So like, when I get out, I will be writing my ticket to be a third mate. So that means I'll be the fourth person in command.
Wow, very cool.
Is that Data?
That be so fourth person in command?
Or would that be Dr. Crusher?
Yeah, possibly Dr. Crusher. I think Data was second officer, third in command.
Yeah, so that, yeah, you'd be basically, yeah, because I think Dr. Crusher, because she's a commander, would take the helm next, maybe. Anyways, this is the connection, Bryson. This is what I've been doing. Every time you show, some schematic that you're working on, or like the outline drawing of a bulkhead, or you've got like just a ton of math, all I do is think of like, okay, so there he is math. In Stellar. Ugh, and math, my goodness. What how scale 1 to 10, how hard is this math, would you say, for yourself? Is math easy for you, or is this something that you've kind of had a natural?
It kind of is easy for me, but like this math I'm doing is, it's 3-dimensional. Like it's astronavigation at its best. Like one calculation takes 45 minutes to do. And you're using trigonometry. You're using, well, not only trigonometry, but spherical trigonometry. And it's hard to get your mind wrapped around that, because you're traveling in a straight line, but you're actually traveling over the Earth, So like, it's so many variables. Yeah. And, like math I'm good at math, but like, like 1 + 1 = 2 is my favorite kind of math, not this stuff I'm doing, right? Yeah. So, it's a lot. And like right now too, like I'm doing a cargo course right now. So we're learning about, I don't know, loading stuff and like how like stability. So you have to worry about like calculations with that, like, like your center of gravities and stuff like that. So you don't tip over the ship.
So not only are you the crew of the starship, you're also kind of the computer.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, like, in the middle of doing this kind of stuff, these crazy variables and calculations, do you ever kind of put yourself in the mind of being on a starship? Like, I'm a total nerd, so when I sit down to like a meeting in a meeting room, I'm like, oh, it's the briefing room, there's the window there and the stars are out there. Yeah. And I just kind of play that in my head. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh yeah, all the time, because like, especially because I'm a navigator at heart, right? So like that's what I would be doing on a starship. I'd probably be a navigator.
So cool.
Yeah.
Just, like it is kind of like, in our sort of imaginary Trek world, you are the closest analog we have, like to Starfleet, in the sense that you do all these like complicated things, and it is very much based on, if you were traveling through space. I mean, even our understanding of space is actually warped, right? Like space is kind of like the size, like the shape of a saddle or something. They say the universe is kind of, and here you are, that is right, where, you understand why the Mercator's map kind of inflates the size of everything at its poles. It's so that you can move in a straight line on a map without having to arc it so crazily.
Yeah, it's just, there's just so many similarities, but it's like, it feels like it's like ancient technology at the same time, compared to like Star Trek technology.
Well, exactly. But you have even more of a connection too, right? You've served on a tall ship too.
Yeah. And fun fact about that is I worked on the Lady Washington.
What?
Oh,
which
wow.
is the Enterprise.
Yeah. From Generations, right? That was the ship.
I worked on her. Yeah.
That is too cool.
Back in, when was that? 2005. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was the Lady Washington. What the hell?
Yeah.
Why are you so cool, Bryson? This isn't fair.
I'm not really cool in real life. No.
I beg to differ, I think.
So I just do a lot of mundane things, the whole thing. Oh,
on the Lady Washington, what mundane things did you get up to, sir? I want to know every detail now. This is going to be a 3-hour episode, by the way. I'm canceling my plan.
Well, like I worked in California, so I worked on a bunch of different ships there, and got to do like a week or two on these ships. But like my main one was in San Pedro. I worked on that, the Irving Johnson. So, but like I got to go on for a week on the Lady Washington. Have fun. We did cannon battles. We did lots of touring of the ship. Like sitting at the dock, being like, "Don't trip over that," and then they would trip over that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, just stuff like that. Cool little, like, we went down to San Diego and stuff like that. So, yeah.
What sort of duties did you have on the tall ships? Where did you find yourself mostly?
I was a deckhand. So, I basically was like the lowest rank. So I did everything. Like
Nice.
Lower decks.
Paint. Yeah. Basically. Yeah. Yeah. That's where I spent most of my time, in the lower decks. Like on one ship, I slept in a room with 18 other people. Yeah. So it was, yeah. And we ate there, we socialized in that spot. We had bunks that were 3 feet by 3 feet by 6 feet,
Wow.
Yeah. I spent most of my life in a bunk that big.
I mean, like one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek is Master and Commander on the Far Side of the Ocean, or Far Side of the World. And I mean, like, there are moments and times where like my historical knowledge can, be like, well, this would have been this way and that would have been that way. And, oh, they're doing this for effect or whatever else. But I'm just thinking to myself now that you could totally be looking at the, what they're doing, say they're tying a knot, or say they're moving somewhere else, and you'd be like, oh, that would kill him. No, that wouldn't happen. Oh, his fingers would fly right off. Like, do you do that as well? Like when you're watching stuff like that?
Oh yes. I'm like, this is not accurate. There's like, I'm like, this is wrong. They shouldn't be pulling this line. I'm like, oh, look, there's a radar covered by canvas. Yeah. That's not accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I nitpick like sailing movies all the time. Yeah.
Which one would you say is one of the more accurate you've watched?
White Squall is pretty accurate because they've used a tall ship, and surprisingly, Pirates of the Caribbean is pretty accurate. Like they have one of like the most accurate like depictions of club hauling in all of movie history. I think club hauling it's basically you drop your anchor while you're sailing and pivot around it and then break it off and go. Yeah. That's like the coolest scene in all of Pirates, I think.
So how do you feel about like when Star Trek kind of brings in a lot of those like nautical terms for like flavor and stuff? Like I'm thinking of Star Trek 6, right? Where Kirk's like right standard rudder, bring us alongside, that kind of thing. And, even Janeway saying like batten down the hatches. And does that ring true for you, or is that like, oh, they're kind of putting something on here?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, like it's kind of like, hey, I know what they're saying. Or like I'll be like, oh wait, actually I gotta see if they're actually using that correctly, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's it is kind of, sometimes it is over the top. You're like, okay, you had a writer in that day, didn't you?
Yeah. Or Nick Meyer was heavily influenced on this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So to kind of pivot into a specific here, you did something very, very cool earlier this year. And I think it's something that really kind of tickled the Picard vibe a lot in terms of what you were up to, and something that I think the actual Enterprise would do on a more galactic scale. Can you tell us what you got up to this summer?
Yeah, I was a deckhand on a ship that went out to the Titanic. Yeah, and we took tourists down to the Titanic in a submersible. I didn't go down personally. I would have loved to, but yeah, we did 5 trips out there. So a good 6 weeks we were out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, at the wreck site. And yeah, it was very, moving moment to be in.
Did you have much of a fascination with the Titanic beforehand, or?
Oh yes, yeah. Like it's what got me into wanting to be a sailor, because like I was 6 years old when they found the Titanic, and I was in that impressionable mindset that like this is cool, like I want to be an explorer, so and it was cool too because like I keep saying cool, I don't know why, but it was awesome. Yeah, like it's so blowing. Like I got to meet actual people that were like there when the Titanic was found. Like our head submersible driver was working as a young person on the Natil. So it's pretty cool. And he dove down to the Titanic 38 times. There's a picture of, just after they're on the deck of the, what's the Woods Hole boat. Anyway, I'm terrible with boat names. Yeah. And they're all there and they have the Explorer Club's flag up, right? And we actually had that with us.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was it was once in a lifetime thing. It was my pinnacle, I think.
I gotta say, man, like it really is pretty darn cool. Like we're all saying this word over and over again because I think we're at a loss. Like you're right. There's a ton of intersecting history, right? Yeah. Just like starting at the top, right? There is this new trip, which I wouldn't mind actually asking after I'm done kind of explaining this out, what exactly the trip might be about. But then, yeah, like here you are meeting people who were either present or had something to do with the initial discovery of the Titanic. Then you're like literally over top of what is, I think, one of the most fundamental historical events in the Western world, at least. So, there's all of that. And all of that history that's just sort of swirling around, plus, your own personal history, like you said, like, I agree. That is a once in a lifetime event. And I really, really appreciate that you took us all along and the pictures you took and all the different little things. It actually kind of like helped my mental health out a little bit, just getting to kind of vicariously sort of sit on your shoulder and watch the whole thing unfold.
Yeah, like that's why I kind of like tried to like live tweet it as much as possible because like, it was just such a phenomenal moment, and humbling at the same time, like to be out there where 1,500 people passed away, to be looking at images of shoes on the bottom on the bottom, that's somebody, so like, yeah, it was, I cried a lot,
Yeah. As I think many of us would, but wow, to be there. And like you say, especially that personal connection, that's what led you to be in the position to be able to be there, was that fascination with that initial. That's amazing. What a story.
One of the most, one thing that actually kind of gave me a moment of pause, and I've gone back to it a few times, is the picture you took while you were anchored, I think, over the Titanic site, and there was like a carrier ship or something out in the distance, and you took a picture because that would like relatively be pretty close to, I think it would have been the Carpathia that passed by.
Oh no, that would be the California.
The California, yeah, and just the running lights, seeing those in the distance, and like thinking again about those people who were like either waiting in the water and seeing those lights off in the distance. It was particularly haunting, but also, yeah, cool too at the same time.
There was moments like I remember our first night there, like I think it was just after I took that photo, I was just standing there on the aft deck and looking up the sky, and just a meteorite just went by, and it was just bright green, and I literally was the only one that's seen it. And I was like, oh, like this is why I'm out here, It was like these are the moments, that this is what I do. And like, it's the coolest job in the world.
I agree.
Amazing. Yeah.
I love my job too, but.
Or like, there's a moment where, like I'm touching this submersible for the first time, and I'm like harking back to like first contact, when Picard is touching the Phoenix.
I love this because of, there's the exploration, there's those vibes as well, but also like just speaking as someone who was born and raised and currently once again lives in the prairies in Canada. Like, this is so far removed from my experience. Like, the comedian Ron James might say, you know, we have waves of wheat. That's the closest we have. But they won't pull you down into a prairie undertow, because that's not our experience at all. So I'm amazed and just in awe. And I love this picture you're painting, because like, there's something, I don't know, fundamental or something, the experience you're painting here, like, it touches something primal in human beings, I think. Being alone out there on this vast wilderness that's the ocean, right? And I don't know, I'm getting chills, and I can't articulate it exactly.
No, I totally agree. Like, it's just it's awesome, you know, like, for every bad day I have out there, you know, I have thousands of great days. Nobody ever wants to hear about the great days. So, like, that's why, like, I felt like I should be tweeting on the great days, because, you know, you need to know, like, the whole story.
So what would you say the big, like, what kind of stood out to you in terms of the response to all of this? I mean, I was standing at the sideline. I didn't comment all the time or anything like that, but there was some pretty excited people for what you did there. And so what would you say, like, stood out? Was there any connections that you made through sharing all of that you'd want to share?
I feel like on my Twitter, I've made a really good community, but, like, what I was doing, like tweeting about the Titanic and stuff like that, really brought in a lot of, like, people that have similar connections to it, you know, and that I never knew, you know, and I've been following a lot of people for years, and, like, they were like, oh, this reminds me of my father, and, you know, stuff like that. So it was all those good memories, you know, like, that people were sharing, that I was like, oh wow, you know, like, I'm helping them to, like, remember these good times.
Well, the vibe I got from you was very Mr. Rogers, and I hope you take that as a compliment. He's someone who really helped me when I was young to get to know the world without always being able to get to those places. As Dan said, we are way the heck and gone from any ocean here. Either you're climbing mountains or you're walking forever. And honestly, if I was going to try to get to an ocean from here, I'd probably go the mountain way, because it's prettier, but maybe north would be faster. I don't know, just follow the river. Anyways, you know, with Mr. Rogers, he was always able to kind of, in a very calm and friendly way, and you could tell he enjoyed what he did, but there was just a manner he had about him that I don't know if it was intentional or not, you sort of took on, where sometimes you'd address the people watching, you know, do you know what this is, or do you know what this does? And then other times, you know, you would just show a picture of the wake you were cutting, right, with the sound. And it was really, I found that, like, ASMR style, just nice to hear the sound of the wind and the water and everything else. There was, with Mr. Rogers, there was, I guess, like, the best term I could use is a casual intentionality to the whole thing, if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes so much sense, you know, because, like, he taught you without teaching you. That's how I take away from Mr. Rogers, you know, like, there was always lessons he was teaching, you know, and that's how I feel like, you know, like, I'm here on this earth to teach. And then when I can't, you know, like, I'm done, you know, like, I've done what I needed to do. So, like, you know, like, I enjoy sharing, like, the little details, you know, like, oh, you know, what's the name of this knot? You know, like, people actually want to learn stuff like that, you know, or, like, you know, what's the function of this random thing on deck, you know? I guess, like, in my industry, like, there's such a, like, niche of people, like, you know, like, there's not that much people that does what I do, you know, especially for you guys, you know, like, you don't grow up around the water, you know, like, I've been around the water since I was born. So it's a different breed, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it really does kind of do that same thing that Star Trek does, and I love how you've managed to sort of marry all of these things together. But I feel like I've been jabbering too much here, Dan. I'm going to let you weigh in. Your
job as a navigator. So how much of kind of what you do would look familiar to a Star Trek fan? Like, if you're on the bridge doing your thing, or what would that look like to someone who knows nothing about seafaring but grew up on Star Trek. Me, maybe.
Well, well, the modern ships I work on right now, like they're so computerized. I can literally press a button and it will take me straight to it, where I need to go.
So it's literally like Chekhov's, like course plotted and laden, Captain.
Yeah, pretty much. Like we don't have big ship's wheel. It's like literally a joystick. So it's crazy how like similarities. Like I don't know if you guys saw, like, but I did tweet like a picture of the bridge, and it's just so futuristic. It looks like a starship bridge, like there's computer screens everywhere. There's touch buttons and like, yeah, it's amazing.
And the next time you go, you'll go in your uniform, right? Your
Yeah.
Starfleet uniform.
Yeah.
Get a selfie on the bridge
Yeah,
of you.
because like I didn't have time to like work on actual like do any of the navigation this summer because I was literally stuck in a small boat on the middle of the Atlantic for 5 weeks, so I never got a chance to be up on the bridge for more than like 10 minutes, definitely next year.
So the other question I have is, how is the food?
Oh my God. Well, like when we had 3 different clients on this summer. So like, we had the Titanic, then we did a couple survey trips on the Titanic. Yeah. We ate a lot of good food. Yeah. The budget was not spared, and normally like when I work on ships, I lose weight. No, not this year. I gained weight. Yeah. So the food was great.
I often think about like when things got good or when things got bad, say like in Star Trek, obviously they've always had the replicator or just sort of the inexplicable amount of food that would be allowed. But I think about like Enterprise and stuff like that, and and not Neelix, goodness, that's Voyager, but Neelix cooking as well, right? And like stores of food and everything like that. What would you say is like, is there like a ship's food go-to that say us land lovers wouldn't really know about? Or is my grandpa was a merchant marine and he always talked about peanut butter and honey toast?
Like, well, not so much on this ship, but like on tall ships, like we do bare bone trips. So like everything's like calculated right down to the T. So like, on long voyages, you run out of things and you'll be like, I really want that. But literally we're out of the middle Atlantic. We can't go to the grocery store. So like like Nutella was a big thing on one ship I worked on. Like people would buy it and like stash it in their bunks and be like, this is my private stash. And like junk food would be, the currency on some ships, you trade things for junk food.
I've done a little bit of research on like pirates and stuff like that. And I found that like the way certain privateers, I guess as they would call themselves, really the captain only had power, like unquestionable power during like a storm or combat. Otherwise, everything else was relatively democratic. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but did you find that on the tall ships that you were on as well? It kind of followed those kind of more democratic rules, or?
Yeah. Like like even us deckhands had a say, because like we ran the ship pretty much, so like. But like the day-to-day operation, like the bigger picture was always the captain and first mate and stuff like that. So
the last piece about this, before, if we're going to kind of keep on this, I don't know if we're following the entire thing here, but or the plan ahead. But one piece is, obviously with the Federation being the kind of sci-fi analog to seafarers and explorers and everything, it isn't the only version of that. And you yourself are Mi'kmaq, and of course Mi'kmaq people are a seafaring people as well. So maybe just we could kind of round the discussion in that direction as well, of talking about, your Indigenous heritage and how that plays a part in your desire to, obviously go out into the ocean and stuff like that and explore and see around and stuff. Because obviously where you are is in so-called Canada, so-called Nova Scotia. Obviously, Mi'kmaq people have been there for considerably longer, traveling the seas, navigating around and stuff like that. So is there any connection you feel in that regard? Or, I mean, that's a loaded question. Of course you do, but what is the connection and how do you feel that?
Mi'kmaq, us Mi'kmaq people, we've been seafarers, forever. We've traveled in canoes everywhere, so like I have that huge like deep connection with the waters, especially the waters here in the Maritimes. Like our people grew up here. So like it feels natural, to be a sailor. Even though like nobody in my family has ever sailed, the closest we got, we were like, my family's history is like, like we made mast tubes for ships, like the Blue Nose and all those Grand Bank schooners.
Wow. You have relatives who worked on those kind of ships, eh?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And then going further back, like, and just for clarification to, again, our prairie and non-ocean faring listeners, when Bryson says canoes, he doesn't mean the size of like a canoe that we would see at Canadian Tire. Mi'kmaq canoes are pretty hefty, hey?
Yeah. Like ours, they could be built up to 30 feet, and had sails and, were built to cross ocean, or not oceans, but, like cross the Northumberland Strait, or like even the Cabot Strait here to, go to Newfoundland.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is fascinating is there is, like, both in terms of oral history, but also archaeological evidence that, yeah, Mi'kmaq people traded and made connections with the Beothuk and other groups of people as well, which is, again, just a testament to their sophistication. So, I mean, obviously they would have had a certain level of mental math, stellar cartography, to make trips of that distance successful as well, which, again, super sophisticated and cool. Is there a fairly strong representation of Mi'kmaq people working in kind of your line of work, or are you?
Not really. Like, I've only ran into a few of us. Like mostly they're like, all my relatives are fishermen. So like being out in the commercial industry is not really a desired aspect. And, like it is kind of like morally conflicting too, because the ships I'm working on right now are linked with the oil fields and the oil rigs and, and stuff like that. So like, the pipelines and such. So like, it's kind of like a moral dilemma, but, like at the same time, you can compartmentalize that, because you do have to make a living. And personally, I rather see these oil rigs and platforms working at their best optimal, like, efficiency and not having problems, not spilling thousands tons of oil, if they do have an emergency. So, like you got to justify it like that.
I get that, living and working in Alberta. And I think, Barry, when you and I first met, I was actually employed by one of the big oil and gas companies, which I distinctly remember you asking me like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I kind of went, "Well," but I was one of the trainers and stuff, so I did the same thing, right? You compartmentalize it. You want people to be safe and you want them to be healthy, and so I saw myself as kind of fulfilling that role a bit. So I understand that kind of trepidation and a little bit of morally gray areas and navigating this modern world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and like the company I work for, they're very like pro-Indigenous, and they actually have a subsidiary company that is all run by Indigenous people, and they're hoping like in the next couple of years they're going to have all Indigenous crews on their boats. So like, I'm happy to like actually start doing that, and helping them with that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I think the key to sustainability is in learning lessons from Indigenous cultures and societies. I think that, I don't know, I don't want to get like too politrexy here, but like obviously there's mitigating circumstances. You're right. People have to eat. And I think about all of the things we do. We need to do what we can in the places we have, and in terms of like educating people. I think that's something the three of us all share. We all educate in our own ways. And that's really important. And I mean, in my line of work as an educator, I talk with a lot of students whose parents are also working in the oil field and stuff like that. And understanding that, human caused climate change is definitely something that the oil field and oil and gas is culpable for in so many ways. But if we were to suddenly decide immediately tomorrow to change everything, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be using oil and gas. We'd just be using it less commercially, less based on profit, and more geared towards sustainability. So I think in all of our 3 specific magisteria, this is a good spot for us to all be at. I'm really happy to hear that this company you're working for does prioritize a certain amount of Indigenous leadership and representation, because I think the more exposure that is there, I think the less we can be so hell-bent on profit and thinking more about the investments that we can make in terms of like having a planet to live on and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, and with like, the shipping industry too, like, like it's still one of the most less producers of carbon than any other industry, and also like we're in the midst of like a huge revolution, like with shipping, like, like where they're going back to sails, they're going back to like all these amazing technologies, like salt reactors, hydrogen salt reactors, that instead of using fuels, like they're using hydrogen technology, so it's awesome, like to be on the cusp of a revolution, for the industry.
I've seen those schematics of ships, and I don't, very out of context, very just, single thing put together in a meme, but it was a ship with kind of these big like tubes coming up or something, and they said they're powered by the wind, and of course the meme was ships powered by the wind. Wow, it's the future. It's like, that's pretty great.
Yeah, those are what are they called? I think Fetner, like rotor sails. Yeah, and they're pretty cool technology, but they've been around since like 1919.
Wow,
Like,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So they're making a big comeback right now.
Oh, amazing. So I was kind of curious, just in your own personal life. I always like to ask this of people who are Star Trek fans. When did you become a Star Trek fan, and what drew you to it? What's your kind of earliest memory of liking this thing called Star Trek?
Oh, well, I grew up in the age of the Next Generation. Yeah. So like I was young. When did it come out?
87, yeah.
87. Yeah, I would have been 6 years old. So I don't really remember it, but I definitely remember it from like reruns and like like I watched it live. Like season finale or a series finale. Stuff like that. So yeah, I'm a 80s and 90s kid, so there's a lot of parallels with like with Star Trek and like what I do in the real world. So like it's pretty cool.
We kind of started the conversation way back when talking about Indigenous representation in Star Trek, and I'm curious your perspective a little bit because speaking for myself, I'm Métis on my mom's side, and I first remember when they announced Star Trek Voyager was coming, and the first officer was going to be in the language of Hollywood at the time, and still unfortunately now, an Indian. There's and all of this, and I remember being so excited at the time that someone who looks like my uncles and my grandpa and stuff is going to be on the show. And I mean, we can talk about where my feelings went after that character was introduced and the things they did. But I'm curious your perspective, kind of seeing that in Star Trek and I guess maybe kind of going with what Barry's been doing this last week. Do you have kind of a report card for Star Trek on their Indigenous representation?
Oh, yes, for sure. Like, I feel like I'm like yelling into the void sometimes on Trek Twitter, because like, like I'm always talking about Indigenous representation in Star Trek, like how it's not been like the greatest. It's been very Hollywood stereotypical representation. So, and a lot of the context was written by non-Indigenous people. So, like there's a lot of wrongs that need to be righted in Star Trek. And like I'm one of those people, like I'm so sick of like aliens always giving technology to native people. Like we see it in Ancient Aliens all the time, the guy with the meme.
And the aliens are always white guys too. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah. So yeah, I always talk about how like it needs to be like there needs to be a new character. You know, they have to bring in a character that's actually fleshed out and like from places, you know, because like all of the white characters, they have these complex backstories. Like, you know, friggin' Janeway hates thunderstorms because she grew up in Iowa. And then you get, you know, Chakotay, where he's like, yeah, I grew up in the Amazon and blah, 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 blah. And I can't make fire with sticks, you know? And you're just like, great. That's the representation that I have.
Yeah, and every time they do something with it, you hear the pan flutes come out, and
Yeah.
it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Yeah, I think like the most for me, and I mean this is a big one, but I think Russell Bates's animated series episode "How Sharp a Serpent's Tooth" probably has the most strongest representation, and it's minimal. Like I think it's is it Lieutenant Walking Bear, I think was his
Yeah.
name.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's it. Like it's probably the least watched bit of Star Trek of all. It's probably the least watchable of all series as well.
Yeah.
I missed the animated series. It doesn't do much for me. I used to watch Hercules. You guys remember Hercules in the back?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Very similar animation style when all the monsters either went rah rah or
Yeah.
Yeah.
again, as like a settler, I never noticed. And yeah, by the time Voyager comes along, I was like, oh, well, there's our representation, and just kind of odie my way along it. And until social media, I think to some degree, I never really fully knew that there was even an issue there. And I think that's maybe Star Trek's biggest blind spot is the Federation. And, you know, the way they make fun of it with the Borg is actually a colonial power and has the ability to affect indigenous communities. Right? I mean, like the Prime Directive, right, is basically their Band-Aid for the crimes of earthbound colonialism and stuff like that. And I don't know, I guess like I've got my ideas and stuff like that, but I wonder if just the way they've structured Star Trek altogether, even though they've made so many advancements in representing people, especially by breaking down the myth of gender and stuff like that, maybe from your guys' perspective, you know, if you could make an indigenous character or you could make something, an arc or something that would be able to tackle the heavy issues that Star Trek tackles, but, you know, in more of like a way that that indigenous people face, is there, and not to put you on the spot, but like, is there anything that we could even say, you know, would be what you'd be looking for, or if you could be given the writer's task, what would you want to make? Who would you want to make?
Well, for me, like I really want to address like how bad did Earth get that all the natives had to move off world?
Yeah.
You know?
Actually, yeah.
Like that's a huge like unanswered question. You know, like they literally left and went to a different world, and they were on that world for centuries, you know? So like, what the heck? That's what I really want to address. Like, why was it so bad that Native people needed to leave?
It was actually funny. I was just talking with my wife, Nikki, today about Deep Space Nine, and we watched it all through a few years ago, her first time. And I was like, oh, we should rewatch that again and start at the beginning now that you know all the characters and stuff. And I started thinking about one of my favorite scenes in the premiere episode of Deep Space Nine, where Bashir is all wide-eyed and excited, and he's stalking the infirmary, and he says, oh, this is where heroes are made, right here in the wilderness. This is frontier medicine. And Kira gets right in his face and says, this wilderness is my home. And she says, you know, you can help by bringing your Federation medicine to the natives. You'll find them a friendly spiritual folk or something like that. And I love that scene. And it's really something that like I wish they played with more as Deep Space Nine went by. I mean, the station is called Deep Space Nine. Like, how insensitive is that?
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, colonialism on Star Trek. Oh my goodness. And then, yeah, they kind of didn't really do much with that after that.
Yeah, the colonialism doesn't have to be addressed, and like it's a double-edged sword. I mean, know how to describe it. But yeah, I guess that's the big thing I really want to address. And like what happened to them afterwards? Because like, I don't know, I just do that whole like, calculation meme thing in my head, because like, at the last time we seen that colony, they were fighting with the Cardassians, and then you skip over to Voyager, and I forget which season they were in. I think just after they reconnected with Starfleet, like they said that all Maquis like colonies were destroyed. So does that mean like the planet of Indians is destroyed? Like, are they extinct? Like, that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Also, Cisco annihilated the atmosphere of a planet because he got pissed off by Eddington. And I mean, maybe some of those people were there too. Like, and did they have time to evacuate? Like, there is sometimes where the way in which, I mean, obviously it's stronger in the TOS and the earlier ones, and I think they're getting to a place where they can approach it a little bit better. I just feel like the recent like Discovery, like where would they best be able to explore the concepts around indigeneity? I really felt like they could have almost done it with their storyline around Saru, but it never got approached. But I do think also like Indigenous people should be the ones writing those stories ultimately when it comes time, because settlers just aren't good at it. We write our own stories, and sometimes they forget tons of people. But but Dan, on your end, like where would you want to see that? Like we haven't talked at length about kind of, or at least recently, about this sort of specific context, but where would you want to see Trek go?
I mean, yeah, just kind of even just giving us a character who's just a character who has like Bryson was saying earlier, like you were saying, a fully fleshed out backstory that isn't tropey, isn't tokenist and all that kind of stuff. And after seeing Discovery season 4, let's have Michael Greyeyes play him. He was incredible. Like, there's no shortage of talented, amazing Indigenous performers to choose from either. Like I think of Stamets and Culber and how they're allowed to just exist as themselves. And the fact that they're a same-sex couple doesn't play into this story. Like, you could, in a lot of cases, scenes with them together, their gender does not matter. It's a loving couple existing. I want to see that. I want to see people existing as people without having to have twee pan flute music playing and them having to go on a vision quest and do things that have very little resemblance to the real lived reality that people live,
Yeah, and if I hear Kuchimoya one more time.
Oh man, I was talking with a student of mine who's Indigenous and has a bit more interest in Star Trek, and we were talking about the what your warp, like let's go to warp sort of engage in, and theirs was Skoden, which I thought was really funny.
Nice.
Yeah. Which I some of us may not have seen Reservoir Dogs. If you haven't, please do. It's a delightful and also really like good. Really heavy in some cases TV show that doesn't have much to do with Star Trek, but I've noticed they've made Bigfoot references every episode almost, and I think that's pretty cool. So I was going to ask, like, this is, again, I'm just moving into the woo land here. You've been on the ocean a lot. Have you ever seen anything weird out there?
Tons of weird things. On this trip, like we had just like random fishing gear just go by us, like that were probably jettisoned from or like broke free from the ship, and it was all set, like it was long line, like I'm guessing for swordfish. So like it was just floated by us, like, or like I remember one time like we were sailing it through fog, like on a tall ship I worked on, and out of the fog I'm just like staring at this thing, and like a life raft comes out of the fog, and it was like discolored, it was half inflated, there's stuff growing on the bottom of it, so it was out there for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's weird. Eerie.
Yeah. So like, and like obviously there was nobody in it, right? Like it was weird. So it just floated by us.
Anomalies.
Yeah.
It's your anomalies, right?
Yeah.
We've detected an anomaly off of
No tears in the space-time continuum though, eh?
No, no, not yet. And another thing is like my catchphrase, which I could say on for Star Trek is Busanich, which means in Mi'kmaq that means let us take a journey together across the sea in a canoe.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Speaking of sophistication, can you say that again?
What? Busanich?
Busanich.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love
So
it.
it means to go on a journey together across the sea in a canoe.
Yeah.
It's even got a it's got a kinetic quality, like the word itself as well. Like it sounds like a let's give her, let's go. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Nice. Yeah, I've been learning a little bit of Cree. My fiance is Cree Métis, and her family speaks Cree, so I've been picking up little bits and stuff. And I found that there actually is like a word for the man walked up the hill with a cane. So yeah, very sophisticated, expressive kind of language. I think that's the other little piece that I was going to say is, like, while you're out there, have you been learning have you learned any Mi'kmaq tradition around seafaring? Has any survived? Because I hate to ask that question, but colonial societies and all that, right?
Yeah. There's some like I have an old school like Mi'kmaq dictionary, like a paper one, and it has a lot of sailing terms in it. I don't really know what they are because like it's written in a dialect I don't know, but I know the gist of the word. It's not properly spelt from my understanding of the language, which is a little bit. But there's tons of sailing words in this dictionary, like port, starboard, helm, everything.
Yeah, I've been a very I made a promise a long time ago that I would learn Cree, and I've been very, very slow going, and I need to just kind of do it. The one thing that sticks in my mind right now, and this is apropos of nothing, is that Tacoma means snot. So I will never, ever drive a Toyota Tacoma. That's all I see now when I see those vehicles.
And like a hard thing for me, like Micmac is like it's so there's so much subtlety into it. Like just even how you say something, if you change like where the pause is, it totally changes what you're saying. There's one word, it's Gesalu, which means I love you. But if you say it with how do you say it? I think it's Gesalu. It means I'm going to throw you gently into a fire. So like,
wow,
my language is complicated because like, even the cadence of how you say things, like is going to screw something up.
Really?
Yeah.
I do love that it's gently though. Like that's
yeah. And I don't know how I can picture how to throw somebody gently into a fire, but yeah, it sounds pretty cool.
I get images of a very sort of like determined but calm, just pushing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion that I am trying to keep to our time limits here, but Bryson, we'd love to have you back on anytime. And if you aren't following Bryson, where Bryson can people find you to live vicariously and through your trips, learn more about Mi'kmaq society, and get the learning? Where can they find you?
Well, on almost all of my social medias, I'm known as Bryson the Gative.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's how you can find me.
Bryson the Gative. And so that's a portmanteau of being a gay native.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it.
perfect.
And I highly recommend you look for Bryson. He is a load of fun. His cats are amazing. It's always fun, and he's always showing us pictures of Mi'kma'ki, which is always beautiful to see. Well, where can they find you, Mr. Dan?
You can find me for now on Twitter at Kertrats, that's Kertrats, and of course in the Positively Trek discussion group on Facebook, where if I'm not posting a lot, I'm at least lurking, so keeping up to date on all the discussions happening there. And of course, Positively Trek on Twitter, just at Positively Trek. You'll find us there.
You can find me on Facebook just at Barry DeFord. Otherwise, I do also tend to lurk around. I did a lot more lurking recently on Positively Trek, so once again, hoping to do a little more there. And basically, that's where you'll find me on the social medias. And once we figure out Twitter, I'll tell you where you can find me then. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And as we always say here, stay positive.